On today's episode of Mama and Mogul, we are gearing up for Mother's Day once again and talking about how to protect our legacies. Legacy can mean many things, but a large portion of it is wealth. In many communities, conversations around building wealth are becoming more prevalent, and I'm all for it. But what we must realize is that real wealth is passed down from generation to generation. And that is where many of us have been robbed because we did not know how to preserve those assets for the generations to come. Today, I am joined by T. Smith from Smith Attorneys Group at Law, who specializes in complex litigation and estate planning. We are going to have a conversation about ways to protect your assets and grow them for the next generation. Thanks for joining us. All right. Well, thank you for being with me today. I'm really excited to have this conversation about as we're all working to build assets and, build things that can live on past us, how we can also be prepared to protect them and have them for generations that are after us. So today I have T. Smith from Smith Attorneys Group at Law, PC. So I'm excited to jump right into this conversation. But first, let's start off with a little bit about yourself.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation. So, just a little bit about me. I'm a hometown kid from Muskegon Heights, Michigan. Went to Western Michigan University Cooley Law School, earned my JD, got my bachelor's from Alabama State University, and I was a double major in music business, entertainment law, and psychology. Started my career off in the New York, New Jersey area in complex and commercial litigation, primarily geared towards business owners. After leaving New Jersey, I'm now in Chicago, where the firm is actually headquartered and based. And we focus primarily in business, litigation, complex litigation, estate planning for business owners and for consumers, nonprofit organizations, and entertainment.
All right, that's wonderful. So, um, the whole reason that I wanted to have this conversation, so it's been almost a year since I posted anything on YouTube, just because life has been crazy, business has been good. So, I've been busy, but I made a tweet. So I still get on Twitter. I know a lot of people don't, but I still get on Twitter every day. And I made a tweet that basically said normalize Black trust fund babies. And I said, in my family, this will be a thing. This will be a normal thing. And so, thousands of people liked it. Hundreds of people were commenting and retweeting. And something that I saw that was a common response was like, tell me how do I start a trust? How do I do? There was a debate where I was like, okay, well, there's people who are trustees of a trust, and then there's trust fund babies, right? Like two different things. But it really brought me back, like, but it starts with establishing that trust, right? So once I saw the response, I'm like, let's have a conversation about this. I think Mother's Day is the perfect time to have it, to talk about, as a mom, as a parent, how you leave that legacy. So tell us what a trust is.
Sure. So, a trust is a legal document that is created in the realm of what the particular individual named the grantor wants. And this document allows you to fund the trust by putting assets, whether that's bank accounts, businesses, certain other investments, precious metals, clothing, pictures, whatever you can think of, just about, we can put inside of this trust. And so if we think of a trust, it's from a perspective of like a box. We build the walls of this box, and inside of this box there are certain rules and regulations that you as the grantor get to establish in accordance with the particular state law. And you put your assets into this box, and in this box, this little world that you've created, you now get to control how these assets will be distributed to those beneficiaries, whether that's children, um, siblings, your church, whatever you can think of. We can make almost a beneficiary of this trust. So in a nutshell, that's pretty much how a trust operates and what it is.
I love that analogy. Building those walls, to protect the things that are valuable to you. I've actually heard of people leaving their animals as trustees of the trust. Um, so if what if I feel like I don't necessarily have real assets yet? Should I be waiting until I have a certain level of assets or a certain level of income before I create something like this?
So for a trust, I would say it really depends, and that's really the most typical lawyer answer that I can give. What happens if I do this? Well, it depends. So the same thing happens here with the trust. But even before we get into when should you establish a trust, let's talk about the estate plan itself.
Let's do
And
that. Yeah.
versus we don't want to just pigeonhole a trust as just it. The comprised estate plan can be a will, power of attorney for finances, power of attorney for healthcare, final arrangements. It could include a trust. It could include investment portfolios and other retirement instruments. But in a grand scheme, if the question was reworded and said, who should have an estate? The answer is very clear, everyone. Who should have an estate plan? Everyone should have an estate plan.
I
Now,
love that. And I'm actually so, I only told you let's talk about a trust and some wills today, but I'm glad let's break it all out. Like, because really people are like, well, do I do this or that? And a lot of times it's like you need both because or not just both, but you named a lot of tools, and it's like, okay, if you have this toolbox and you walk around with this toolbox, but all you have in there is a hammer, what happens when you need a screw? What happens when you need a nail? Like, they're all doing different things to work together. And I love that you said that because a lot of people will establish one thing, whether it be a will or the plan for how they'll be buried, or but you kind of left a lot of other holes for your family to have to try to figure out what you wanted. And in a lot of cases, not just your family, but for the state to determine what it was that you wanted.
that's correct. And to piggyback off the question, or to finish the explanation of the question about the estate plan, when you should have it, and I mentioned everyone should have it, right?
Mhm.
And again, it could be a will, which again is another legal document that passes assets when you die,
Mhm.
or you could have a trust. Both of those instruments transfer ownership of property.
Mhm.
The biggest difference, a lot of people ask me, says, T. Smith, what's the difference between a will or a trust? Well, uh, all trusts act as wills, but not all wills. Well, a will is not a trust,
Right.
period.
Mhm.
The will itself, again, another document instrument that the person creates for themselves that says, when I die, here are all the things that I have that I want to pass on to these specified individuals.
Mm.
When that occurs, when the death occurs, then those assets pass through. Non-probatable assets will pass through. The biggest difference between the will and the trust is a will is probably your lowest level of protection of properties or passing, or lowest level or ability to pass an asset, versus your trust is a more secure, and the various types of trust tells me if you're going to have a greater security in
Mm.
passing the type of asset if it's a larger asset. Wills are attackable via probate.
Mm.
And probate
Okay.
is a process of facilitating an estate. If you die and there is a will, in a lot of jurisdictions, you have to file that will with the courts. The courts determine, yep, the will is valid. The named representative, the person that is going to actually start to distribute the assets from your will to
Mhm.
your beneficiaries, will say, the judge will say, yep, this person is legit, they can do that. And then the process carries on. Sometimes the will is not determined to be valid. Uh, Something people mention all the time to me is, well, what happens if I just, sign a napkin and put, I want such and such to get this, such and such to get that. Will that suffice? No, it won't suffice, because there are legal requirements that an estate tool, particularly a will, must meet in order for the courts to say this is valid and we're going to allow it to pass. A trust, on the other hand, allows you to bypass having to go through probate. Because it is a more complex document, the courts deem it to be a little more secure, and so they allow you to bypass the probate process.
Right. And when you get that trust, you get so your lawyer or a lawyer is going to create that trust for you. You get a binder. So I serve as a closer for loans.
Awesome.
So if you're refinancing, you're purchasing, you're selling, any of those things. And I come across so many people, several people a week who have a trust. So um it starts with people in their 30s, 30s, 40s. Couples will come and they'll have a trust, and it'll be like the Christian Grant Trust, established on May 7th, 2021, and all their paperwork will be in that name. And when they sign, uh they're not signing as themselves, but they're signing as a trustee. So it's even like, I don't technically own this property, but my trust owns this property, and I'm just the person that's designated to sign for this trust. And so when I see people coming in, they come with the binder that their lawyer has set up. It has all the paperwork, and so I have no questions about what's happening with them. Where you said like um a will could not necessarily hold that property in the same sense. But also, if someone else came along with a really good lawyer and a really good argument, they could dispute that. And to me, when we talk about building these things, it's not for you. Now, some of these tools are for you.
Mhm.
That power of attorney, that's going to help you in case you don't die, but something bad happens to you. You want to make sure someone loves you, is there to speak for you and take care of you. But some of these things are for after you're gone. And so I think that it's a labor of love to establish a lot of these things, because I've seen people who lost a parent or a spouse unexpectedly, and they're like grieving. They are really hurt, but they have to go to court and fight or battle over something that was a discrepancy. And like, we know what you would have wanted if you were still here, but you're not here to speak. And now strangers get to have input. And now people who may have showed up in the last few hours of your life, who didn't really have your best um interest at heart, are taking advantage, and they don't mind fighting because they're not hurt that you're gone. You know what I'm saying? So they're taking advantage, but the people who you love the most have to go through this. I feel the same way about life insurance. When people don't get life insurance, to me, that's one of the most selfish things you can do to the people you love, because there's no way I should have to be posting a Cash App link or a GoFundMe. I should be able to be at home, really like honoring your memory and grieving you.
I like to give a personal story there, and unfortunately, some years ago, I lost my dad. But my dad took the proper steps to establish our estate, or
Mhm.
his estate plan. So my mother and myself and my siblings, we're good to go. So I like to jokingly say, yeah, dad, he was a good man, and he died, and I cried all the way to the bank.
you, like, we work so hard through our lives. It's an extra step to make sure that that work was really worth something. Being in the real estate arena, I know people who make a really good living getting properties and assets from probate court.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a
uh you
responsibility
know
that you have to your spouse, if you have one, your children, your family, to have your affairs in order when that time comes, because it will happen. We will all eventually pass.
Absolutely. I just went, was it 2 weeks ago? I just went skydiving,
Wow.
San Diego, over the ocean, 13,000 feet. And when we were in that plane, like climbing up, I was just thinking, like, okay, all right, well, everything is in order. Like, my daughter will be okay if this is how I go, but you breathe a little easier knowing that, like, my
Absolutely.
paperwork's in order. It's okay.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I like to tell a lot of my clients who have minor children is, the will only comes into effect once you die, and the will has very little authority as to who gets to control the asset once it's passed on to that beneficiary.
Mhm.
The trust, on the other hand, you can put stipulations clauses in the trust that says, if I pass with a minor child, this child will not be able to take the asset or gain possession of the asset until a certain age
Right.
until they turn 18, 21. Or you could get creative and say until you graduate from Western Michigan University, or something else that a lot of my clients do, particularly mothers. They say, "Yeah, we'll let this pass to their." They'll say to their son, "I'll let this pass to you should you not marry that lady," or vice versa, should you not marry that man.
Hey,
You,
it's all family and estate planning. I understand. Like sometimes you have to, make your
exactly.
part. I was reading about this one guy who established a trust, and it had a large amount of money in there for his kids that was still, accruing interest. And one stipulation he put is that each child could each year, whatever salary they made working, the trust would match their salary. So if you had enough ambition to go make $25,000 this year, then you got another 25,000. If you went and made 200,000, 300,000, the trust was going to match your money. And a lot of people are like, that's really unfair. But first of all, I think one thing that paperwork like this does is let people know up front before you're going what the expectations are. So like I told my parents, um my mom was gonna watch this, and they chose one child to be to be the trustee, and I was like, okay, but tell us what you want ahead of time so there's no surprises. Because one thing that's also heartbreaking is seeing a family bicker and fight when you lose someone who you love, and there shouldn't be any surprises at the table. Like, if you want me to have the fur mama, if you want me to have the fur mama, put it
Pass it through the trust.
put it in the trash, tell us that. But at that point, I don't have to deal with somebody else or a sibling and be mad at them and potentially have a rift that lasts for years. It's like mama told me herself, or dad told me what he wanted. And so if you know that that's the type of parent that you have, who's like, I'll match your salary or whatever, it's still a blessing. And it allows, like, as a child, you can be like, I'm gonna work hard for this 5 years, I'm gonna make six figures, and then I'm gonna chill for 10 years, 20 years, living off of it gives everybody an opportunity to plan and know what type of life they can expect.
Absolutely. And I tell people all the time, when you don't have a proper estate plan in place, and the family fighting starts, the only person that wins that fight is the attorney, because you're going to
True. Those
pay
billable hours.
hundreds of dollars, sometimes thousands of dollars, to satisfy essentially a family feud. And in that sense, nobody in the family wins, but everybody in the law firm does.
Right. Nobody wins when the family feuds,
Exactly.
the J line. But okay, so let's talk about this from the beginning. I am a single mom. I'm like, you know what? I have the house that I own, I have a life insurance policy, a few other things. What I show up at your door, what does the process look like?
Well, first thing we're going to do is we're going to take an inventory, just kind of how you were explaining, of all your assets. Most people, the first thing people say if they're homeowners, yep, I have a house or I
Mhm.
have bank accounts. But things that a lot of folks don't think about, what's going to happen with those things. For example, family photos, or
Right.
the furniture, or as you mentioned, mom's mink that she's going to pass on to you.
To me, yes.
Yeah. Or the China set, or all
Right.
of these various things that we really don't realize that we've accumulated over our lifetime, that has to go somewhere.
Have you seen people put crypto in their trust? Have you had that happen yet?
It's a thing that's coming along more so now. Crypto, and I really don't want to dive too far
Okay,
into it.
yeah, we were.
It's such a new area, and it's so difficult to really tie it to any particular law, because it's almost lawless and government.
Lawless, right?
But yes, in short, individuals, they who have their essentially their wallet or on
Their
their thumb.
ledger. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that has been passed through the trust itself. Now, the actual digital asset and the currency as it is in the crypto world,
Right.
that gets really difficult to
Mm-hmm.
really manage that from an estate planning perspective.
Wow. Yeah, that'll be interesting. But I'm sorry. So okay, we take account of all the assets.
Sure, yeah, we take account of all the assets. Then once we know all the assets that you have, uh, more of the personal questions come. You know, are you married? Are you widowed? Uh, do you have children? What's Are there any children that you may have had that you may not know about?
That everybody doesn't know about,
You know,
right?
and those are situations that a good attorney has to, and it's uncomfortable sometimes, but you
Mhm.
have to ask that. And one thing we for sure do, if you come into the office and you're married, we typically try to have the conversation with each spouse.
Individual. Okay. All right. I like this. So we're gonna get back to this, but I have a question. So, okay, if I say yes, I did, and this is interesting to me. My mom, actually, the last episode I did, my mom was adopted, and her dad never knew that she was born, and her mom was away at college, so her mom's family never knew.
Right.
Um, if her mom had have left something, but if you pulled me to the side and I said I do have a daughter, how would we proceed? And I was like, I do want to leave something for her.
Yeah. So you tell us that, and first question, does the spouse know? And if the spouse does know, then that makes things a lot easier. We get
Right.
to do things more, conscious free.
Mhm,
If it's a situation that you tell us in confidence to know, my spouse doesn't know, and to the best of my ability, I want to keep that private.
mhm.
That's our duty. And we have a
Wow.
attorney confidentiality rules of ethics that we have to abide by. And if you're saying that, yes, I want to establish this particular estate plan, I want this child to have a piece of it, then we can absolutely
Wow.
include that child into
And
it.
so, okay, if my spouse and I are having a joint trust, right? It's all of our assets together. How would we allocate things to them? Would it just be things that are just my individual assets that can be allocated to that child?
So if it's a joint trust, then in that situation, all of the assets that you guys own will be owned by the trust.
Right. But
And
I
then,
would have to keep something out
well, yeah,
of the
if you
joint
want it,
trust.
well, there's a couple ways we can go about it. One, if the spouse knows, yes, it's not going to be a problem.
Right, right, right.
If the spouse doesn't know, you would either have to create a different trust
Mm,
outside of this family trust, this joint trust
right,
for that particular child, and then you have to fund that. So there's actually something to leave.
right. I'm
Otherwise,
not advocating that people, have extra babies and leave them trust, but I'm just, just interested in how you navigate that because I think, life isn't cookie cutter, life is not cookie cutter and we like to pretend that it is, but to me, when it comes to taking care of the people you love, especially the people that you brought into this world, they didn't ask you to do it. Like I just think it's such a duty for that to happen. Now, do you see spouses do separate trusts, have individual trusts? Does that happen often?
yeah, all the time, actually, especially if in the situation like yourself, you're an entrepreneur. If one spouse is an entrepreneur, owns several businesses or has a business portfolio, and the other spouse is not or does not participate in that business, then it makes sense to
Mm,
have a separate trust a lot of times. In conjunction with the trust, there's also a business succession plan that we like to put into
oh,
place for the business
wonderful.
itself. So when the spouse that owns the business, they deceased and whatnot, there's a plan in place to how the business can continue
For
to be
that spot,
operated. And then those proceeds from the business can still fund his
the
individual trust,
spouse
which
or
also
the
can
yeah.
fund the family trust.
Now, do you have any opinion on how your business should be structured? Is it like, it's best for it to be like a S corp or is it like any business entity can go here, or we usually suggest a certain type? And then does the trust offer any further protection for the business owner from liability or anything like that? Or is it just, protecting the asset itself?
Sure. So to address the first question, I really want to highlight a point that you made that life is not cookie cutter.
Hmm.
It doesn't apply to everybody, and each situation is different, and that's very important and super applicable here and why it's so important to, when you're dealing with estate planning or you're dealing with business formations or operations, that you work with an attorney and those other professionals, because our job is to gather the facts that you tell us,
Mhm.
all of the facts, not just can you click on this and click on that. And I'm not knocking any online do-it-yourself softwares, but the greatest advantage is you get to talk with someone who is real, and they
Right,
get to apply real life situations, because it's not always cookie cutter like that.
right,
To answer the question, which entity is best, it really depends on the situation that you have, and the business that you plan to go into, and if this business is going to fund any of the trust. So LLC sometimes can be simple to integrate in with the estate plan. Other times, what happens if your business is a multi venture
mhm,
conglomerate
right.
enterprise? So the
Or
LLC won't
just
do it.
partnerships in general, like would we be placing 50% of the business in the trust, and would the partner have to sign off on the succession plan?
So the succession plan, no, not necessarily. That's pretty much solely contributed to the business itself. And when it comes to the business succession plan or the business proceeds paying into the trust, that's all going to be drafted and configured in accordance to that person that's starting the trust, the grantor.
Right.
That answer your question?
Well, so what I'm saying is, if I have a business and I
Mhm.
have a business partner who's not, a trustee of this trust, and not a spouse, if I want to place that business in my trust, will the language say like 50% control, 50% ownership? And if I'm making a succession plan for that business, does my partner have to agree with
Got
with what's been put in place?
Got you. So the way that we would know what percentage of the business would go into a trust, really, we have to look at the business documents, the formation documents,
Right.
articles of incorporation or articles of organization, the
Hmm.
operating agreement or the bylaws or shareholder agreements or anything like that. That's going to tell us what percentage, or even if it's possible to pass it through a trust or an estate plan.
Okay.
Some businesses restrict your ability to transfer your ownership interest to your estate. They say it could be drafted in a way that when
Right.
the partner or person passes, that is then absorbed by the company. The company may have to pay some proceeds to the heirs for those shares or that ownership interest, but it may not be able to be passed over into an estate plan. So we
Right.
really have to look to the business documents to answer that question. As far as a succession plan, the succession plan is going to be geared primarily for those owners of the business. So if hypothetically it's a 50-50 ownership, that person's 50 is going to be able, they're going to be able to make their
Able to,
succession in
mhm,
regards to that, as long as it can be in compliance with the
with the
government
articles.
of the business.
Got you. Okay, thank you. Okay, so um we show up to your door, we go over this inform we go over like the intake session. What's the next step looking like?
So after we go through the assets and we identify who the beneficiaries are going to be, then our next question will be, if we're going to make a trust, let's talk about the restrictions or the qualifying events that you may want to put in this trust.
Mhm.
Like I mentioned, you can get really creative. If you go to college, when you turn 25, if you take care of the dog until the dog dies,
Right.
whatever you can think of, we can just about draft it in accordance to your desires. And so that would be the natural next step. If you're not going to create a trust, once we have, and you're going to go with make like a will, once we have the assets in place and we know who the beneficiaries are, we can pretty much start to, we'll give you our questionnaire. We have a will questionnaire that you complete online. It has various questions, and you go through it and you answer it, you submit it back to us, and based off of the answers, we can go ahead and start to build the will out. And in a nutshell, those questions are, name the asset. Do you want this to split equally between children if there's multiple? Do you want to go to one person versus the other? Are you intending to leave out certain individuals, children, or spouses? If that's the case, then we have to be careful, because there are certain laws in place that statutorily don't allow you to omit a spouse or omit
Right.
a.
And so what does so can you define what a spousal state is? So I'm in Michigan, we're a spousal state. Can you define what a spousal state is, and what are some things that I wouldn't be able to not leave to a spouse?
Well, you could just about leave anything to a spouse.
But are there things that I can't like redirect, or that they would, so I know when we're signing closing documents, there's two different type of documents you're signing. You're signing borrower documents, financial documents saying that you used my financial information to confirm that I can repay this loan. So your note is saying like, this is the bill and I'm going to repay it. But then there are ownership documents. So in a situation like if I'm married, my husband's paying we used his finances. I'm a stay-at-home mom or whatever. We're using his finances, but then I'm still going to sign the mortgage and other things stating that I have ownership. And if correct me if I'm wrong, but some states don't have that. Some states, just because you're a spouse doesn't mean you have to sign those documents. In Michigan, we're like, no, we need you to go back home and get your husband or your wife. They have to sign this because they're your spouse. So they have some ownership here, and you cannot make a big financial decision like this without them agreeing and signing. So all of that to say, like, what if I bought the house, I'm paying for the house, I want to leave the house to kids instead of a spouse? Or like, are there just what are the rules around what I can not reserve for my spouse?
So, yeah, so to really, the best way to answer that is, one, there are some jurisdictions, as you mentioned, that have certain requirements to include the spouse in the major purchases, and there are other jurisdictions that don't. In the sense that one spouse passes and that individual was not on the title or the deed of a house, then you said that this property is going to pass to the children. Well, it can in some jurisdictions, that could happen. In other jurisdictions, it may not quite work that way.
And does it have to do with the fact that the spouse lives there, they've been living there?
Yes and no. It has more so to do with it hinges on, were you guys legally married? And if you were legally married, then some assets almost automatically pass to the spouse.
Mm.
And then after that surviving spouse passes, then to the children.
So, so I think, a lot of people know that I had my daughter really young. I had her when I was 16. And so I haven't, married for a lot of reasons, but also like just know I had a baby girl at home. So next year my daughter turns 18, and I always joke with her like, okay, I'm about to start dating. Like I'm about to be out here. But um as a mama, as like her sole provider, I want to make sure that she's well taken care of. And I have seen situations where parents get older and they get married at the end of their lives,
Mhm.
and they would have wanted to leave everything to their kids, but something happened with their health, they passed away unexpectedly, and things went to their spouse. And it was proven that the spouse didn't necessarily have their best interest, at heart, and the family really took a blow. So as a single mama, I'm like, it's certain things I want for my baby. So how do you navigate that?
And that's why an estate plan in place is so important. In that circumstance where you remarry and your child is already an adult, but you want to leave something for them, the
Mhm.
trust is going to be the best document to do that, because you can omit individuals from being a beneficiary from the trust. Uh, and you don't have the same regulations that you do with the will. Like I was mentioning with the will, if you leave out a spouse, there is a statutory rule called
Mm.
omitted spouse, and that starts to kick in. I believe for Michigan, the omitted spouse is entitled to the first $150,000 of the estate plus 2/3 or 1/3, one or the other.
Wow.
And so there's is pretty much no way to cut that person out unless
Right.
you go through a other complicated legal process, as we'll
Right.
say. But the trust in that situation, if you as the grantor create the trust and you name an individual to be the trustee that's not your spouse, and the spouse is not a beneficiary, that's completely fine. The courts they look at the trust as being kind of like a private document. It's not something that you have to publish to the world. You don't have to file a
Mm.
trust in most jurisdictions.
Right.
But a will, sometimes you do.
So, okay, so if this isn't a published document, for whoever I'm making a trustee of the trust, how do I let them know? Do I have to give them the documents, or does my lawyer hold this paperwork? Especially if these are minors right now, right? And this is for them when they're later on. How do you make sure that information is passed on to them?
So we always tell our clients that your trustee you want that person to be someone that you trust,
Mhm.
which is why it's called a trustee, or someone that you actively communicate with. Usually, if you're going to do a non-professional type of situation, um, attorneys can also serve as trustees. Most attorneys are. I'm not going to say most. Some attorneys are hesitant to do that because of our malpractice liability that we could be exposed to.
Mm.
But you can have your attorney, your accountant, CPAs, financial advisors. You probably have heard of trust companies like Northwestern Mutual and Trust. Those
Mhm.
types of companies you can pay to serve as trustees of your trust. And really, when you pass, they're one of the individuals that will either be notified because if it's a private person, because they're close to you, they know that you died.
Mhm.
Also, if we get notified as the law firm that created the trust from the family that yes, this person has passed on, do you have the estate documents? We say yes, we do, and then we can tell and we can notify who the trustee is. Otherwise, if it's the actual business, if it's a company that's running, operating, or a professional operating as the trustee, usually they get notice from the family. Or if there's like, if it's a bank, the bank will know when you died, the death
Right.
certificate, things like that'll be public record.
Okay. All right. So, actually, I'm like, I have questions, but I don't want to jump ahead. So we're in your office. We've established what route we want to take. Now, what if so? Are there certain things that I should be not just getting a trust or just getting a will, but you mentioned some of those like power of attorney things or whatever. So I want to touch on those quickly, like what they are, what they do, and if you need to get that in conjunction with perhaps a trust.
So for us, a power of attorney for healthcare and a power of attorney for finance automatically comes with all of our estate planning document packages. Whatever package you choose, you're going to get the power of attorney because they're so important. And what the power of attorney does, in a nutshell, it says in the event that I am incapacitated, whether that's deemed legally by the court, or if I'm in a medical situation where I either unconscious or whatever, a doctor deems me to be incapacitated, or no longer has competency, but you're still alive. That's the
Right.
important part. You have to still be alive.
Yes.
This document comes in, it starts to operate and says the individual that I've named as my agent, my healthcare agent, or my financial agent can step in my shoes and make decisions for me. And some of those decisions are: do you want to be kept on life support? Do you want to be administered artificial food or water, things like that?
Mhm.
Or uh, you're in the hospital, I need to pay my mortgage because the bank doesn't care that you're dying or in a vegetative state. I need this person to be able to go to the bank, take out money and pay my mortgage or pay my kids' tuition. And this power of attorney gives that individual that authority to do so.
Mm. Yes. So has to be somebody that you trust.
Definitely has to be somebody that you trust,
Especially with that do not resuscitate.
especially with that. And we typically, only in the worst case scenario do you name the power of attorney also as a beneficiary.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
you know, That's a no-no. You don't want to do that.
Right, right, right. Okay, so um this is a broad question, but I know it's a question everybody will have. So I know it's not a one size fit all, but typically, what is a range, a price range that people should say, like, this is what I should be saving up to be able to, start having these conversations and establishing these protections for my family?
So for a will, as soon as you own anything, if you own anything, you need a will to pass. Otherwise, if it goes to probate, strangers could attach to the estate and say that you owe them this, or you gifted that to them.
Right.
The government also has an interest. You mentioned that the government makes billions of dollars actually yearly off of individuals that didn't have a proper estate in place,
Right.
but the government wanted something. Sometimes that's property.
A
If
lot of times that's
Right.
probably
Sometimes that's property or the ability to do something on your property if it's not getting
Mhm.
the whole property itself. So as soon as you own anything, a will is at least in place. When it
And do
comes,
I have to have five figures, six figures in the bank before I can start doing these things, before I can start establishing these documents?
no, a basic will, for our firm, we charge a flat fee of 375 for a basic will.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, y'all
this
can afford that.
it's one of those
Those
things that,
PPP loans.
right. The will, the base estate for us, for our firm, our model is, we really learned a lot going through this pandemic. So many of our clients reached out who didn't have estate plans in place, and trying to get before a judge during the pandemic, during
Mhm.
the shelter in place, was impossible.
Yes.
Literally impossible. What people could not come into the courts.
Right.
And in that situation, you now have bank accounts that if you're going through the pandemic and you're not working, you don't have access to these money. And
Hmm.
this also applies to spouses. The
Right.
banks don't have
Yeah.
to honor the marriage. If that
Right.
person, a named beneficiary or co-owner of that account, they won't allow you to take those monies out absent a court order.
Right. Wow. And in some cases, I mean, that's what you want. That's why the person wasn't on the account, but in an emergency, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so that's for a will. If I want to kind of upgrade myself to do a trust, is it still a comparable price? I know, like, not even ask for exact prices because it'll differ based on state and things like that. But if I have a few $1,000s, should I be able to take care of this paperwork, or should I save up a little bit more?
Sure. Our motto is transparency. So there's no secret here.
Okay.
Our cheapest trust, our living trust, we started at 1250, and
Okay.
you have a range depending on the complexity of the trust and the type of trust, because there are a number of types of trust that you can create. So that number from 1250, from the cheapest all the way up to 25,000 or 50,000 or
Mhm.
$100,000, depending on the complexity and the size of the estate. So that's transparency in a nutshell. I
Thank
think
you. I
it's
appreciate it.
fair.
Sometimes people,
Yeah.
you get on social media and you like, oh, how much is this? And they like message me. I'm like, so wait, everybody can't know how much it is, or
Now, I want you to know, because it needs to be understood. If this is not something that's in the budget, and that's a real situation. If you can't afford it, you can't afford it.
right.
There's no need for us to waste each other's time.
Right. But I feel like it's definitely something that you can, those prices that you mentioned are totally reasonable to give yourself peace of mind and know that your family is taken care of. And if you don't have it right now, that's okay. The number is something that you can save up to, because it's that important. To me, it's right up there with your life insurance policy, um, your stocks and your savings, because like, that isn't just for you, it's for the people you're bringing into the world and that you love the most. So okay, what questions have I not asked you that you want to cover?
So I think a question that a lot of people, and I think you were kind of hinting at this, is how much money do I need to have in order for my
Mhm.
trust to
Right.
really, for me to actually need a trust? And then I
Right.
think one thing that's super important is, how do you fund this? What does it mean to fund a
Great
trust?
question. Yes.
So how much money should you have before you start to think about constructing a trust? It's not really based on the number. is more so based on your circumstance and your situation. You know, are you married? Do you have kids? Do you own a home? Do you have investments? Do you own a business? And if those things, if those answers are yes, or if any of those answers are yes,
Mhm.
is probably a good idea to reach out to your local attorney and start talking about estate planning. And really, like I mentioned, the trust is one of the most secure ways to pass assets and
Right.
avoid it from probate or being publicly known. So that's not really a hard and fast how much I need to have in the bank to build a trust, but it is fact and circumstance specific in regards to funding the trust. Because paying us to build a trust and having this box of protection and
Mm-hmm.
nothing in the box does nothing for anyone.
Right.
So funding it is actually more important, honestly, than actually creating it.
And building it.
And you
Okay.
fund it by one of the most important things that we've expressed tonight: life insurance. That's a big one to fund the trust. You can name the trust as a beneficiary of your life insurance. And people say, well, why would I want to do that? Because I can name beneficiaries on the document itself. Well, there's a lot of reasons why you may want to name the trust as a beneficiary versus on the insurance document.
Right.
Use you for example. Your daughter right now is 17, so she is not the legal age of majority.
Right.
So those funds may or may not be paid out directly from the insurance to your daughter.
Mm-hmm.
Additionally, let's say that the funds are paid out. Well, typically 17-year-olds don't have a bank account.
Mine does, but we don't want her. We don't want her managing those funds yet.
You don't. And something that a lot of individuals come to me and ask about, well, if I die and I don't have an estate plan in place and my child's other parent gets the child, what about that money that I left?
I'm trying to like
Well,
leave my face real straight right now. Like,
you might be paying for that other parent's new lifestyle, you know, because not all parents are created equal. They may not do what's best for that child, or they may not save that money and set it aside for that child.
right. Or whoever that child goes to,
Correct.
my daughter and I always watch this show where two parents were like penny pinchers their whole life. So their kids never were able to do anything. But the parents had like some good friends who always lived like a lavish life. So
Mhm,
the penny pinchers died,
mhm,
but because they had lived like that, they had millions of dollars, and so they left the kids with those other friends thinking that had means that were those people were well within debt because they lived this extravagant life, and they spent every dollar of those parents money before the kids. I mean, the kids were like middle school, so well before the kids would be there, but it kind of just went through that scenario. And those are things like, as a parent, that I think of, even when you're choosing godparents or other people to be in your child's life. Um so I guess another question, but no, I want to talk about the life insurance because there are two types of life insurance. There's the whole life and the term life, and I think that people that they're used, for different things. There's also like an IUL account. Um, but I think that people sometimes miss the value of life insurance because they don't know all of the things that life insurance can do for you. Um, a lot of people that I've talked to know mainly about whole life, which is a smaller amount, but that you can draw, basically like a loan from that whole life. So some people are like, well, I mean, it's $10,000, it's $20,000. And like, I wanted to just make it clear that some people have $1 million life insurance policies. So even if I am not a millionaire, I can guarantee that my child will be, by just paying. I mean, I think my life insurance, I pay quarterly.
Mhm.
But when I break it down, it's $21 a month.
Mhm.
And from that $21 a month, my child will have seven figures, you know. So it's different ways. Like a lot of people are like, I can work every day and it's not going to be enough for what I'm leaving for my kids. And it's like, no, there are different decisions that you can make. And so now your trust, just based on that, right, has some real value. And then depending on how you have it paid out and what you detail, that money can be earning interest for your child. You know, or it can be working for your child until they are of age, and even past that if you decide to stipulate that.
Correct. And that's really where you get the term, a trust fund baby or a trust
Yeah.
fund child. Is you have means that's funding this trust, that's making money and continuing to grow even before the child can accept the payment, the distributions from the trust, or until they meet the qualifying event that allows them to then start to receive the benefit of the trust. And it really, and I was mentioning, there are so many different types of trust that you can build to quote unquote make someone a trust fund baby. And you can fund it a number of ways. Life insurance, I think, is one of the most important ways. But also, as we mentioned, if you own a business,
Mhm.
that business succession plan may say pay out this portion to my estate for a number of years or for the life of the business, or whatever the case may be. Also, certain retirement accounts.
Mhm.
You got to really be careful with the retirement accounts, though, because when you start to get into like the IRAs, the Roths,
Yeah, yeah.
the self-directive, those can get really iffy when it comes to trying to name an estate, naming a trust as a beneficiary. But it definitely has some advantages in certain situations. So that's something I would encourage you to speak with your attorney and your financial advisor with in regards to that. But when you have, and depending on the type of trust, the two primary types are revocable, irrevocable.
Mhm.
If you have, let's say, an irrevocable trust in place, which means once it's created and once the property is placed in it, that's it. You can't take it out, absent legal reasons or things that we draft in the trust to say that you can. But when you put those types of assets in a irrevocable trust, a lot of times they are not being taxed. So when we talk about having trust fund kids or building generational wealth,
Wow,
one
I
of the
didn't
ways
know
to
that.
do that is to
Hmm.
put assets and large sums of money into certain types of trusts that won't be taxed. And when I
That's
say won't
good.
be taxed,
Okay. So but I'm only going to put, so two questions. I'm like, hold on, wait. So do people often have like one irrevocable trust and then one revocable that like they may be making changes with these assets? Or so, because I'm like, okay, if I put my house in a trust, but this might not be my forever home, I might sell it, you know, that would be like a revocable trust item then, correct?
correct.
But if there's a property I'm never going to sell and I don't want, does this also mean I don't want them to sell it?
Well, it depends. You can say that. You can say it in the trust documents that I don't want this house to be sold. Um, in some state laws that'll be fine. Some state laws it may not be. But in regards to what you were mentioning, you have a property that's not your forever home. Is that considered? Should that go in a revocable, irrevocable trust? 9 times out of 10, if you are still living, you want that property to be
Right.
held in a revocable trust, so your
Right.
living trust, because you still want to be able to use that property, stay there, sell it, or do whatever, rent it out,
Right.
whatever you want to do with it. You still have the authority in a revocable trust, a living trust, to do that. In an irrevocable trust, you give up your right, or you give
Right.
up your ability to say, I don't want this to be in the trust anymore. And in
Right.
fact,
So do
if you
people
take out,
sometimes have both?
yeah, yes, there are individuals that have living trust, revocable, and there's some that have irrevocable. The ones that come to mind, situations where you have a living trust and let's say you're a middle class person, is when you're getting to get up in age and you want to rely on Medicare or Medicaid. And so you build these types of
Mm,
trusts to cover up assets that you don't want to
yes.
sell off in order to meet the threshold. And that allows for your medical benefit from the government to kick in and still pay for your long-term care.
You know what, T? I am so glad we're talking about this because I have seen people, especially people of color, who need to put their family in a assisted living. They cannot afford those large assisted living bills, and there wasn't a plan beforehand, so they've had to sell off properties, they've had to sell off assets because they're like, Medicare, Medicaid will not pay for this while she still owns a home.
Right.
And that's heartbreaking, especially if something happens to a parent where they're unexpectedly hurt and they need help daily living, and
Mhm.
they were like, I wasn't prepared to sell my childhood home, or now I had to sell it for less than what it should have been because we didn't have time to do what needed to happen at the property. And that's really heartbreaking to see. And I should know that there's a loophole out there for people.
Yeah, there's almost a loophole for everything. But yeah, oftentimes that is a situation that we see, and
Yeah,
my wife and I, who my wife is also an attorney, and we
I
have kind of
love it.
unfortunate reality that you either need to be one or the other, either be poor or be rich. Because if you're middle class, you don't get if you're poor, you get help of the government sometimes. And there's other advantages that you can receive, and there's assistance for you. If you're rich, you can afford it. If you're
Right,
middle class, people feel like, oh, you don't need it.
right, you got to pay for it. Yeah,
Oftentimes, the middle class are those individuals that really do need the help. And so if you can plan ahead and put in the situation where you may need Medicare, Medicaid coverage to deal with long-term care, if you have this trust in place, you can still keep the assets that you worked so hard for and not have to sell it off to be able to then pay this home health care service or this long-term care service.
right. And so, if my home was in a revocable trust though, and I needed those services, would it still be the same? Would it still be necessarily the government saying like, we see those assets and like something needs to happen with them before we're able to offer care?
So those Medicaid type trusts have to be irrevocable trusts. They
Okay.
can't be revocable.
Okay. I
If
just
it's
wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, if it's a living trust, and the government will deem that you still own it,
Hmm.
even though it's not on paper in the name of you, you still have control over everything, and
Right.
that's the whole issue with Medicaid and revocable, irrevocable, having control and giving up control.
And what my grandmother did for my mom is the mom she grew up with all of her life is once she got up in age, she deeded the property to my mom. Just in case anything happened, which was fine. But my dad, the money man, was like, hold on, that means the tax bill is coming in my name. Like, so they were paying those taxes. And this would have been the other solution to that. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah, I'm not gonna say that because there's a look back period. And when you have these major transfers, uh, where you deed a house to somebody else, or you empty a bank account, or whatever the case may be, you transfer the beneficiary of your retirement to this person. And it's within this look back period. Sometimes that's a 7-year look back period. And the government sees that, they're going to say, well, you did this in anticipation of X, Y, and Z.
Right. Well, I mean, if she would have transferred the property into a irrevocable trust, would that have been better than deeding it to my mom directly?
Again, it depends,
Okay.
because sometimes, depending on the type of trust it is and depending on the jurisdiction of the state, whatever the state law says, even the look back period
It
applies to
still
that.
applies. Got you. Got you. All right. Well, um, I feel like there was another question. So you were saying, okay, funding the trust. So we were still talking about different ways to fund the trust. Can real estate also fund the trust? Well, I guess technically that would be a business, but is there, anything that you have seen stand out with your clients regarding real estate?
Yeah. So individuals that do real estate as an investment or as a business, that is a great way to fund the trust, because that's usually recurring, perpetual income,
Mhm.
monthly,
Right,
yearly, whatever.
right.
So yeah, that's a great way to fund the trust is real estate. Another thing or another asset that people, higher earners use, uh, silver, gold, uh, and as you mentioned, Jay-Z earlier, portraits, paintings, things
Art.
like
Yes.
the Van Gogh, you know, those types of assets, although they are not quote unquote making money at that time, it's not paying out a distribution into the trust. Its value,
It's increasing in value.
increasing
Yeah.
value, which increases the amount or the worth of the trust. And another thing I
So
want,
are people able to leverage the equity of it? Like, is it looked at as okay, if I'm a trustee of a trust, that's not mine, like it's not the Christian Grant Trust, but um if it was my parents' trust, am I able to leverage the value and the equity of the trust to fund other things or do other things, or do I need to pull, like literally pull the wealth or the money from it?
so that's a great question, and the answer to that is you can't, and you can't because you don't own it.
Right, 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 right.
The trust owns the asset. The asset
Mm,
isn't able to be used by the beneficiary until the trust says that the asset can be
right.
used by the beneficiary. So there's nothing to leverage. In certain cases, we have case law about this. Banks or other lending institutions make bad business decisions, and they say, "Yes, I'll lend you this because you have a trust by, and you're a Vanderbilt child, or
Mhm.
or you're a JP Morgan child, and we know that that's a family with big money that has a trust." Yeah, a lot of times those banks or those institutions cannot attack the trust and force the trust to pay out. That's
Yeah.
another advantage of the trust. Not only do you get some of the tax protections, it has protections from creditors or debtors, excuse me, creditors. Yes, they can't come and say, well, you owe us this amount of money. We know
We're
that
gonna
this
right.
trust is worth $3 million. We're going to attack the trust. Depending on how the trust is structured, it'll survive that attack. And,
Wow.
and that creditor won't be able to get the funds from that beneficiary until the trust pays out to the beneficiary. That's
Huh.
another
Now,
thing.
do they have access to the documents to know when the trust pays out to the beneficiary?
And there you go. And those are private documents.
Mm,
Unless
I
unless
love it.
unless you're subpoenaed, if those documents are subpoenaed or requested or a court order says otherwise, you don't have to necessarily turn it over. Um,
And so I can't list, like if I'm applying for a loan or something, I can't list the assets in the trust as, wealth for myself. Like I can't list the real estate or the bank accounts. But if there is like a monthly payout or something from the trust, I can list that as income.
yeah, and it is income.
Hmm.
That goes to a point that I was just about to make. When I say that certain types of trusts are tax advantageous, they're tax advantageous from the person that creates it, the grantor, paying or whatever property they put inside of the trust may not accrue tax because there's an estate tax of, I believe, 11.2 or $11.5 million now. And then once the estate exceeds that amount, then that becomes a taxable entity essentially. But as long as from beneficiary's perspective, if you have monthly payments that are, it's what's called a discretionary. If it's a discretionary payment, then it's not really going to be considered an asset, even if it says yes, the trust has the option to pay you out, because the trust then has the option to not pay you out.
Hmm.
But If there's one where it's non-discretionary and the trust is a must pay you out every month or every quarter, then that money that's coming out of the trust and into the possession and ownership of the beneficiary is taxable, and it's also attackable in a creditor perspective.
Wow. So, okay, that's a lot. Like those are a lot of details um to, weave into your trust. So what if how do I make edits to my revocable trust? How often can I make changes? I've had five more kids since I established this, or I just have more assets now. What does that look like?
So the general rule that we like to say, and it's not a hard and fast, but whenever you have a major life event, it's probably a good time to revisit any estate plan, whether that's your will or if it's a trust, if it's life insurance, if it's retirement accounts or investment accounts. That's always a good time to revisit it and make sure that things are up to date. Also, one of the rules that we like to say is every time there's a new president and their cabinet in power, because laws that tend to get affected, regardless of what party you support or a member of, can be for or against you. For
Right.
example, the corporate tax rate is like 20 something percent under a previous administration. An administration before that, the corporate tax rate was like 30 something percent.
Hmm.
So whenever administrations change, laws change, new judges come into place, new lawmakers, Congress folks, senators, whoever. And so that's always a good time to revisit your estate plan and your wealth portfolio.
And so do you do that because you might see something that's more to your advantage or some changes, adjustments that you need to make?
Sure, for both. Yeah, there may be some advantages that you can take advantage of, or there could be some things that are going to come into play down the road. For example, um, we'll use the Affordable Care Act. It was passed Obamacare. It was passed during Obama's administration. The previous administration made some edits to it, but it wasn't applicable until like year 2019. So
Right,
you
right,
had time to rearrange things.
right. Okay. That is wonderful. I feel like this conversation has so many gems um to just help people, even if they can't apply it today, they can plan for it in the future. So I'm just so thankful for you jumping on with me and having this open conversation. All right. I feel like that was a lot of amazing information, but I want to make sure that people know how to contact you. So tell us how we can get a hold of you and what states they can use your services in.
Sure. So the best way to reach us is on our website at www.saglawpc.com. That's saglawpc.com. Also, you can reach us via email at info@saglawpc.com. Our main office number is 708-320-3337. And regarding the various states that we practice in, so SAG Law is a multi-state law firm. We have offices in California, Illinois, Michigan, New York, New Jersey, Georgia, and Texas. We have a remote presence there. And we affiliate with other firms. Even if it's not something that we can necessarily handle, we can connect you with one of our sister or brother firms.
Okay, I love that. And you know, I I think that is so important. A lot of people um don't necessarily have a lawyer or like trust lawyers because they don't see people who look like them. So I think is really important to have people who look like you all over the place. Like I think there are a lot of services that we associate with wealth, and it's just like if you're wealthy, you have a CPA. If you're wealthy, you have a financial advisor. If you're wealthy, you have a lawyer. And what I've learned is those are actually the tools to building wealth, because they're teaching you the things like this: how to protect your money, save your money, how to really make your work multiply, so we're not always working as hard. So I'm really excited, and I think today, like, you definitely showed us what an asset you can be to somebody's family and helping them preserve the wealth that they're building. So I'm excited for this to drop for Mother's Day weekend. The link will be up soon, and I really can't wait to hear the feedback. I'll be sure to tag you in so you can respond to questions and things that people have.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad we have the opportunity to discuss this. And we're looking forward to having more Black trust fund babies.
Absolutely. I will contribute a few. I'll contribute a few to the count, but I look forward to having to watching people really build wealth and enjoy it. So you enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
All right. Thank you for checking out another episode of Mama and Mogul. Be sure to comment, like, and subscribe to the channel, as well as sharing this episode with your friends. We'll see you soon.